and welcome to the Credit You Deserve podcast. In this podcast, we will cover relevant topics that impact your personal finances. You will walk away better informed about the basics of personal finances, with tips and recommendations you can incorporate into your own daily lives. We will also inform you to the latest developments in the financial world and the impact they may have on you. You work hard to take care of your finances. Isn't it time you get the credit you deserve?
Hey everybody, welcome to the Credit You Deserve podcast. I'm your host, David Murphy, president of the Marshfield Medical Center Credit Union. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about cybersecurity, what it is, how you can protect yourself online, and what to be aware of in terms of attack types. Since 2004, the President of the United States and Congress have declared October to be Cybersecurity Awareness Month, helping individuals protect themselves online as threats to technology and confidential data become more commonplace. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or the CISA, and the National Cybersecurity Alliance, or the NCA, lead a collaborative effort between government and industry to raise cybersecurity awareness nationally and internationally. So today I'm joined by Nick Arnoldy, President and CEO of Marshfield Insurance. In both our industries, financial institutions, and in insurance, cybersecurity is a hot topic. So welcome to the podcast, Nick. Appreciate you taking some time to talk to us today. As we just mentioned, cybersecurity is such a hot topic, and it's not just the big players. We're starting to see it even in small Marshfield here and impacting individuals.
For sure.
So, from the insurance side of things, what are you guys seeing from cybersecurity, and just how do you guys approach it in the grand scheme of things?
So, cyber insurance is probably the quickest evolving product and the most changing product that we're working with right now. And some of those reasons are due to the increased costs, the increased claims that we've been seeing. Just in the past year, rates from last year to this year have gone up about 110%, which is, shadowing anything in property and liability. No, nothing's even close to that. But that's because claims are going up, and the payouts for claims are about 60% higher than the year before. Cybercrime last year was a $6 trillion global expense. So it's something that is focused on in the insurance industry. The policies are evolving, and there's a lot of different options out there. So it can be rather confusing, but it's something that we're working with a lot more and talking a lot more about.
Are you having conversations with both businesses and individuals when it comes to cybersecurity, or is it more geared heavily one way or the other?
Yeah, that's a good question. Both. There is endorsements on your homeowner's policy that can help you with ID theft, and those are very important. But more so on the business aspect and the liability, because your general liability doesn't include anything for any data breaches or anything like that. So those are endorsements and standalone policies that you need, and there's a ton of different options out there as far as how you can do it, how cheap it can be, how expensive it can be. Obviously, the more expensive, the more robust policy. So it really just depends on the type of business, but there's a lot of conversations.
Well, and I suppose really we should give a little bit of a backstory as far as like what even cybersecurity is. So from a business standpoint, we're seeing businesses essentially being taken over, whether it's through like ransomware attacks or any of the other types of attacks that criminals from all over the world can basically get into your network internally. And so I'm sure even I know we've had stories locally where that's been the case. And
definitely.
Whatnot.
Yeah. We've had local claims for sure. Some claim examples, I think everybody remembers the Target situation, where I think people assume that maybe the big companies are the ones that get attacked, but actually it's the small players. It's people like Marshfield Insurance Agency or smaller businesses than us, because those are the low-hanging fruit. In that Target situation, actually wasn't Target. It was a refrigerator contractor they had in there that had some virus malware. And when they linked up the computer systems, because everything's digitized over there, things got infected. I believe that was like a $19 million claim, which is actually small considering the type of retail business that they are. But the focus really is on small business, because again, low-hanging fruit. Do they have the firewalls? Do they have the protection? Things like that.
Yeah.
So.
And then on the individual side, a lot of it's like through email compromise, or we talk about it internally here at the credit union, but just online banking credentials is like the number one target. But ID theft is a big one as well. Having your information on the black web and the ramification that you're seeing from that. And
Yes, 60% of all cyber insurance claims come from phishing and social engineering. And I should mention a little bit, since we're talking about the different products, there's really 3 ways to do it, in my opinion. One is self-insured, which means you don't have any coverage. 2 is there are some endorsements you can add on to your business policy that provide you some coverage, and it's going to be the basic coverage of liability, first party, and third party. And then there's the robust standalone policies that'll give you coverage for social engineering, things like that, the phishing. Those are more common. I think we were just talking about the emails that we receive. I think everybody's gotten them, trying to get you to click on a link and submit some sensitive data. Those types of things can be covered in a robust cyber policy, but on a basic policy, they're typically not. So those are discussions to have with your insurance agent about what your risks are. So lots of different ways to do it.
Well, and as an insurance agency, what kind of suggestions or training are you giving your business clients to? Obviously, the insurance is in place for the what-if scenario, but to try to, as best as possible, because it is challenging. It's challenging to avoid any of this, but what are some steps that you're telling your clients, hey, these are low-hanging fruit, why don't you guys take care of whether it's training or strong password requirements or anything like that that you guys recommend for your clients?
Yeah, it all seems really basic, like at least to me, where it's like, oh, you should know not to click on this, but they have been doing such a good job of mimicking even your own email addresses. Internally, I've had my email address mimicked and sent out to staff with a link to click on. Is what I'll typically do is when I see some of those, I'm share a screenshot. You don't ever want to forward or click on those, obviously. Hey guys, just a heads up, this is the type of thing that's going on there. Is what should be done, and what a lot of businesses are doing is they'll have internal audits. They'll try and bait their employees to click. And you'll notice when you get a lot of emails from different people, different vendors, that they'll say this is an external email, be careful, they have those reminders. But I don't know how good those are, because if it's on like every external email, it almost is like white noise. You see it all the time, you're like, yeah, I know. But you should be doing, I think, audits and the occasional, if you have an outside IT vendor or even internally, it's almost, baiting them to see how good they are on that, a what-if situation, if you will.
Yeah, one of the challenges that we find at the credit union is trying to get the information out, but also not doing it in the method delivery that fraudsters are actually using. So when we talk about, well, we should send an email out to contact our members about this, but it's like, well, that's how the fraudsters are doing it. So if we're telling them, hey, you can trust us, but that's exactly, you're almost counterintuitive to what you're trying to stop. So it's really hard to distinguish between like trustworthy emails and links and whatnot and not. And I'm sure that's a big thing that you're seeing as well.
Yeah, always consult your IT vendor, the best method to get something like that out there, because of that reason. A lot of maybe in the credit union app or something like that, you could have it, because a big thing right now is multi-factor. If your business doesn't have multi-factor, they're going to need it, and they're going to need it soon. To get cyber insurance right now, anything above $100,000 limit have to have multi-factor.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're not going to have any markets that are going to be able to help you.
And is that like multi-factor just for email access, or is it for like your internal
Getting
systems?
Getting into your workstation at all.
Okay.
Yeah, can't even, before you get into your workstation. And a lot of that's changed since COVID, right? Because we had a lot of work from home.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason that we're seeing all those claims increase, because when people were working from home, they didn't necessarily have the security measures in place.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think now businesses have those parameters in their handbook and policies out there where they're a little bit more buttoned up. But in 2020, we just didn't have that, and that's why we saw those claims go up. That's why we've seen those rates go up, and that all has a really big impact.
So from the insurance standpoint, do you feel like I could see this just continue to grow and grow and grow, because it's so hard to wrap our hands around it? I mean, even the federal government's struggling to figure out how to handle cybersecurity. Sure. From the insurance side, what are you guys seeing in the next 5 to 10 years when it comes to cybersecurity?
I hope that the premiums stabilize. Right now, it's not looking like that at all. In fact, this 110% increase from 21 to 22, they're forecasting it again for the next year. Okay. Just because, again, number of claims are up, 60% higher payout on those claims, like I mentioned before. If things like that don't check down, obviously the cyber insurance is going to get more and more expensive. So it's trending not in a great way, more so than other things, property or an auto. So we're trying to keep a watchful eye on that. But that should tell the consumer something. Usually when rates are going up, there's a bigger exposure for that. And that's not one market, those are all markets. So
Sure.
Unfortunately, things are going to get a little worse before they get better.
Yeah, I think that happens with a lot of these new developments. I think is you gotta kind of weed through and just let things play out. But unfortunately, it's hard when you're in the midst of trying to figure that out or whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. We were mentioning before the COVID and the work from home. One of the interesting things that had come up during that process, and something we had to evaluate ourselves at our office, is the bring your own device. So a non-business-owned cell phone, a smartphone, iPad, or even the desktop at home. So what you find in most cyber insurance policies, they don't cover if it's not a business-owned device.
Oh, okay.
So is what you need to do is have a bring your own device policy and find a market that will cover that. Beasley is one that will do that, which we, of course, sell out of our office. But those are things that are recent changes in the cyber policy.
Okay.
So,
and speaking of like specific carriers, if you're a small business or even if you're looking at adding something onto your homeowners, what are some tips that you would provide to applicants as far as what do you look for in a carrier? Because I know a lot of people are going to hone in on premium, right? Well, the cheaper because I need to keep my costs down. Well, there's usually a flip side to that, whether it's the longevity of the carrier or how credible they actually are. But with cybersecurity being relatively new, no one's got a 50-year track record on insuring this stuff. So what do you guys look for when you're suggesting or making suggestions? And maybe as a consumer, what should we be looking for?
Yeah, there is no standardized cyber insurance form. So there is for homeowners, there is for auto, and they all take this basic policy form, and then each company will add a few things or maybe even remove some things. Cyber insurance is the Wild West. So everybody writes their own policy. So when you're getting a $200 or $250 policy, which there are out there, it covers minimal items. And it's better than nothing. But versus, going out there and getting a $2,500 policy for your business, that's going to cover things like lost income. Those basic policies that are a little bit more inexpensive, when you have some downtime, they don't cover lost revenue. They don't cover that social engineering that we talked about, and those are two very important items. So unfortunately, like most things, you get what you pay for.
Sure.
And that's hard in the insurance world because it's an intangible. It's not like a car where you can see all these great features. You just have to wait for something bad to happen to see that it works. But there's a big, big difference between a basic endorsement that's $200 on your policy versus a standalone policy that sometimes it depends on the industry, whether it's medical or financial like we are versus a retail shop. How expensive that's going to be. But look at your options, at least price those out. And I think from the individual side, belt and suspenders is always the best method because those buckets don't cover everything from the individual side, meaning on your homeowner's policy, you can get that ID theft. But then, and this isn't even an insurance product, but get a credit monitoring service too, whether it's LifeLock or something like that. I think it's helpful.
Okay. I know you touched on it a little bit during the previous conversation, but just when you're approaching cybersecurity insurance, what are some underwriting tips so you talked about certain policies that you need to have in place. Are there any other unique circumstances perhaps that, some of these things do benefit the business, but for purposes of getting cybersecurity or getting better rates in cybersecurity, would you recommend?
Oh yeah. Number one, as we mentioned before, multi-factor. Gotta have it for sure. The other items really work with your IT vendor. If you're your own IT vendor, get some outside counsel and make sure your firewalls and security are all up to date. I'll run through a 3 to 9 page cyber application depending on what we're looking for a particular client. And the vernacular that comes in there is so specific that you do need an IT person to go through that application.
Sure.
Granted, if you're checking the boxes where most of that isn't done in your organization, it's a good risk assessment even to go through the application, even if you don't buy it, because it's a checklist of what you need to do. Because if those insurance companies don't want to insure you through the underwriting process, that means you've got a significant risk, right? So whether or not you buy it, it's good to run through that application process because it's a great checklist for your business.
Sure. How does cybersecurity protection work when you're working with outside vendors? So we as an internal shop, we can do everything that we're supposed to do, but I think every business works with some type of an outside provider at some point. You can only control that so much. How does that dynamic work from I guess the insurance standpoint, but then also just from running your organization? What can you do to try to ensure? I mean, I know you can probably set up two-factor with maybe that relationship, but
I think of all the software vendors that we have, and I think that's probably the thing you think of the most. And a lot of people tell me, well, my software vendor, whether it's the debit card machine, they're taking care of all the security for us. Or I thought of a nonprofit that has software that they use, and they say it's all secure, they take care of all of it. Say, check with them and see if they're indemnifying you in the event of a breach. Because the likelihood of them covering everybody in the event of their breach is low, because think of how many people that they work with. They could never indemnify all those people. And how could they be responsible for the transmission, whether it's over Wi-Fi or the Ethernet lines or whatever? They can't be responsible for that transmission. It can only be on their system. And as what I've found 100 times out of 100 is they do not indemnify. So those vendors, even though you have the PCI compliant machine and we're PCI compliant, or we have a vendor that has really great security and 100 servers throughout the world, they don't indemnify you. They can't. You're on your own.
Sure.
If they get breached, you're still on your own.
Okay.
So it is a false sense of security, but definitely check with your vendors and see what security that they're providing you, see if I'm wrong. If they're providing you some, that's great, but get a copy of that too. Because unfortunately, when you're dealing with your sales vendors, they want to, maintain a good relationship, and they may not know the nuances of that contract, so get it in writing if there is some assurance, but most of the time they're not providing any protection, so you're on your own.
That's good to know. I know from our standpoint, we see a lot of members who are getting into situations, and it's not necessarily just digitally, I guess, so to speak. So a lot of people are getting phone calls, phishing phone calls or whatnot. And so I'm going to make the assumption, but I will ask it as well. Cybersecurity, does that handle if someone gets a phone call and then at what point does it actually switch over to cybersecurity versus if I cold call you and you give me your debit card number, let's say, and then I take it that way? Is that cybersecurity or does it have to involve technology like email phishing and that kind of stuff?
It doesn't. That's where you get into those more robust policies. If you've got that first party, third party endorsement coverage on your business owner's policy or commercial package, you're probably going to be on your own on that situation. If you've got a very robust policy, it can include those types of social engineering aspects, but you have to purchase that coverage. And every carrier calls it something different. So if that's a concern, that's something you want to talk to your agent about. And we've had those situations and ran through those situations with folks before. So it's definitely, that is ramping up, and that's a great question. But you can purchase insurance for that, but you're going to need that more robust policy for it.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's not, everybody thinks cyber liability, data breach, computer. It's not just that. I think it's one of those things that they could adjust the title a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it even covers if you're transporting a check to the credit union here and it gets in the wrong hands, it blows away in the wind. It does protect those sorts of things. Now, those are probably the minority of the situations, but it would protect that as well. And that's a physical asset, obviously.
Okay, that's good to know.
Wisconsin here just should be noted that if you have a breach, you have a duty to house that material securely. And the courts have obviously held that up. That's why we have cyber insurance. But in Wisconsin here, you have to notify everybody within 45 days. That's affected. That's a Wisconsin statute. In addition to that, businesses do have to provide credit monitoring service for up to 12 months in Wisconsin. Some states are 24 months. So if you're doing business with somebody in a different state, that could be 24 months. So those expenses compound. So we're talking about notification, credit monitoring, obviously the lost funds. Did it affect your business with business interruption? those claims, on the average claim, I've heard anywhere from 100,000 all the way up to pushing $1 million. Just depends on the industry.
Okay.
So some of the things that I think get forgotten are just how quickly those things can compound. But it's no longer a piece of insurance that can be avoided, meaning a lot of people don't think they have an exposure, and everybody does. And it seems to be picking up pace, as they indicated. We're going to probably see rates double again next year, which is, I've never seen, I've been in insurance 20 years, I've never seen rates do that on any sector.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a concern, and everybody should talk to their agent about it, and at least go through that process of quoting it and getting that application. It's a great checklist.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe just for my personal knowledge, but so are a lot of the cybersecurity laws that are enacted, are we seeing it on the federal level, or is it more handed down to the states? As you mentioned, like Wisconsin has certain rules that other states may differ, or is it like with any law, there's varying degrees?
Yeah, I believe there are federal levels, but I'm most familiar with the Wisconsin statute, which is section 134.98, and that's where you have to notify people 45 days.
Okay, gotcha.
So each state, as I mentioned, some you have to have credit monitoring for 24 months. That's a state statute.
Yep.
I gotta imagine, and I'm not confident, but there's likely federal as well.
I would imagine so as well. Yeah. I think the big takeaway from this conversation is cybersecurity can be overwhelming because it's not going away, as you talked about. It's going to get worse. There are protections as far as insurance, but really there are small steps that you can take, whether it is looking at the two-factor and making sure that's set up. Just training and having the conversation with your staff, I imagine, is a big one as well. And just watching the things that you're clicking on, whether it's email or out on the web, making sure you're using strong passwords. Like, there are small steps you can take because it can be, you can almost feel like, well, there's no point in doing anything because if a hacker in Ukraine or Russia or somewhere in the Middle East is going to chop into your stuff, there's only so much we can do. But I still would say, and I believe that you guys would say this as well, at least take the small steps, do the things you can do, and at least try to avoid some of those easy prey situations, so to speak.
It's getting worse from the number of attacks and the severity and the rates going up. So it's something that shouldn't be avoided. Definitely look into it. Take the time to do that. What is it? Ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say. So do it on the front end. I know everybody's busy, but it's going to save you a lot of headaches on the back end.
Yeah, great. Anything else that you'd want to include?
No, I think
really good information.
I think we hit the high notes, and just know that there's a variety of different products out there to help protect, and just do your diligence, ask questions, do your audits, and we're here to help.
Yeah, great. I would say ultimately, if you have any questions on cybersecurity, whether it's just what cybersecurity is or whatnot, the government has a lot of information that's out there, but ultimately, if you're a small business, talk to, whether it's Marshall Insurance or some agency in town, talk to them, start the conversation, because at this point in time, it's not too early. You can't, you're almost too late at this point if you haven't started this conversation.
Been fortunate, yeah.
Yes, but that doesn't mean don't ignore it or push it off. I mean, have this conversation, get the ball started. Just chalk it up to, it's one of those necessary evils you got to do when it comes to, if you're doing any business online or if you're doing anything online, I mean, you gotta take this into consideration.
Everybody is, I think, whether you're sending payroll records or just basic emails.
Yeah. There's so many things you do that you don't even think about as far as, oh, well, yeah, this is done online. You're thinking, okay, well, I do a lot of in-person transactions. Well, but are you accepting card payments or are you doing anything online? Emails. I mean, there's the scope to which this covers is just ridiculous.
Yeah, everybody has different needs, but I would say everybody has a need.
Yeah, absolutely. So I appreciate the time this morning to talk about this. I think it's really important for everyone, whichever side you're coming in from, whether it's the business side or the individual side. And check, like I said, check with Marshfield Insurance, check with any of the insurance companies on that. Or if you have questions on the individual standpoint, I mean, you can reach out to the credit union. We can get you in touch with whoever we need to. But like I said, so Nick Arnoldy from Marshfield Insurance, appreciate having him on. And hope you got some good information out of this ultimately. So thank you.
Thank you.